Hi, everybody. This is Marie Jacobs from Sotheby's Realty, and I am privileged to have Brady Mullen with me. Brady is a real estate financial advisor, and we've been doing a lot of education, me mostly listening and Brady mostly educating. So welcome, Brady.
Thanks, Marie. And I'll return the favor. Like you talked me up, but all I can do is look at stuff on papers and computers. It doesn't mean anything until somebody gets into the dirt and starts, making the things happen. So I couldn't do it without you.
Thanks. It's such a good partnership. And today we're here to talk about real estate investing. So whether you don't own a property and you're just going from being a renter to a buyer, that's one real estate investment in your primary property. We also have people who have their primary property and have a lot of equity and are thinking about using some of that equity to buy a rental to start building wealth and start building and preparing for retirement. And then we have folks who are already investors and have a couple of properties besides their primary property, and they're looking at how to take equity out of those and make even more and better investments. So we're going to just talk for a couple of minutes about what Brady has to show us here today. He's got a really good couple of slides to explain some things. So why don't you take it away and let us know what we're going to be looking at.
Super. Well, the overall tenet here is that a lot of times people will chase cash flow immediately out of investment properties. And there's nothing wrong with cash flow. Like ultimately, when we retire, we're going to need cash flow. Otherwise, we can't stop working. But when we're in an accumulation phase for our investing, cash flow, if we optimize for cash flow, in many cases, that is minimizing the other ways in which people create wealth in real estate. Like through appreciation and tax benefits and debt pay down and things like that. So I want to show comparing those two things, and ultimately by minimizing cash flow now for the sake of getting the better investments and getting better valuations on your real estate, you're actually maximizing your cash flow for later on when you need it. And I'll show what that means. So
and that's let me just make a comment about that, because
yeah.
We've been having that conversation just now about my own personal real estate, because I have a rental and it's got a lot of equity in it and I'm getting pretty good cash flow. But when we ran some scenarios, we discovered that it would be better for me to sell that one rental and leverage myself into two rentals, and that would accelerate the growth of my wealth for retirement. But it would be at the cost of lower cash flow today. But that's okay, because I'm still working today, so I can take a hit on the cash flow, but I'm going to reap the benefit when I retire, because I'm going to have higher return in income having two properties growing.
Yeah, so a real estate portfolio will have babies, right? If you buy one, you don't necessarily, if you're younger and you're still trying to accumulate real estate, you don't want to necessarily pay it off and then try to save up enough money to go buy the second, because the first one, once you have enough equity, you can refinance, pull equity out, and now have two of them that are both appreciating, both increasing in cash flow. And those two can become 4, can become 8, depending on how much time you have to build that portfolio. And then ultimately you get those paid off. And when you need the money, you have it coming from 4 or 8 properties instead of 3 or 4 if you try to buy them, serially, one by one, and getting paid off one by one. And I'll show you what I mean here. But that's a perfect example.
And I love the way you're talking about that, because I've got a lot of millennial clients right now, and they're a couple years or 3 years or whatever into their properties, and they've got some equity built up. And now they're all kind of in this position where they could buy their second property, and they're still young. And by the time they get to retirement, they're going to be all set.
Well, and
okay,
then in the Front Range market in Colorado, it's handed us a gift. We've had anybody who purchased a home in the last 4 or 5 years is sitting on some pretty decent equity, and you can use that to put it, to create wealth, to have your real estate portfolio have babies for you. That's kind of how I think of it. So let's talk about the 4 ways that you can get where you get wealth in real estate. First, there's the cash flow. That's the one that's obvious to everybody, right? You buy something, you get some rent, and that is wealth. But there's also the appreciation, which is usually the biggest factor of wealth creation in real estate. That's usually the biggest component where the wealth comes from. There's also debt pay down. If you have debt, every time the tenant pays rent and you pay the mortgage, you're buying some equity with that mortgage, because some of it's going to principal. And then there's the tax benefits. Depending on your tax rate and where you are in other places in your life, there's some tax benefit It's going to mean something different to everybody a little bit, but we can estimate that and make some guesses there. So here's an example of a portfolio where this was 2 properties. The client had about $1.2 million worth of real estate. They had about $376,000 of debt on the property. Properties. So they had about $857,000 of equity. And if this doesn't sound like your situation, if you're watching this or listening to this, don't worry about it. It's the concept that matters. This is somebody who had had some investments for a handful of years, and they're getting about $2,000 a month from cash flow. But here are those 4 components that I mentioned in the last slide. You've got the cash flow, the appreciation, the debt pay down, and the savings from the tax benefits. So this number, and here's where they're represented on the graph. So these numbers matter, right? This is how much their total wealth is increasing from those 4 components. And if you look at that as a percentage of how much equity they have at stake, so their investment in this portfolio is valued at 857, right? The total value of the real estate minus the debt. And that $850,000 investment that they have is producing about $76,000 of wealth for them in any given year, which is about a 9% return on equity. This is an important feature that a lot of people don't focus on in real estate. We focus a lot on cap rate and income sources, but your return on equity is a really important component, because if we're looking at any other kind of portfolio, that's what matters. What do we start with at the beginning of the year? How much wealth was there? How much wealth did that create? And that's our rate of return that we think about in other portfolios. But to capture that in real estate, you have to look at all 4 of these components and look at that. And that's a decent return, but it could be better. So this, as a percentage of how much we have invested, makes 8.9%. Now, if we just restructure this same portfolio, so we're looking at the same amount of equity, 857, if we use that to go and purchase more real estate, the first thing somebody would likely notice is that their $2,000 a month of cash flow has now been diminished to about $1,000 a month in cash flow. So that will sometimes shock people and be like, wait, you're talking about lowering my cash flow from my real estate portfolio? And the answer is, if we look at this equity position that we have, and now how much wealth we're creating from all 4 of the ways that people make money in real estate, this is significantly better. I'd rather be making $118,000 a year in wealth than 76. That's better. It's a higher number. And it comes from these same 4 sources, but they're now different. So the cash flow is a little lower. The total appreciation is much higher. And we're using 3% appreciation, by the way. So we're using a pretty modest number for appreciation of wealth. The debt pay down is higher. The savings from taxes is meaningfully higher. And if we just compare these side by side, there's those 4 components. The next slide will compare them side by side. So there's the current scenario as it is. There's the scenario that we just looked at if we made some changes to the portfolio by using the equity to purchase more real estate. There are those 2 comparisons side by side. So yes, the cash flow is smaller. The appreciation is much larger. The debt pay down is pretty similar. It's a little smaller on this side, but the tax benefits are a lot higher. So your total wealth, your total wealth increase in the first scenario is about 76 and about 118 in the second, because you're trying to maximize for all 4 of those components so that you have the highest possible stack. And this isn't even the highest possible stack. If we sacrifice a little more cash flow to get more of these things, we could, and it would be a little higher. But I wanted to show a portfolio where we're not sacrificing all of the cash flow, just some of it, to try to increase the wealth accumulation in any given year. So
what happens to that over the years is that just keeps increasing. And then eventually you get to a point where you have so much debt pay down that you start increasing how much income you have. So when you need that income, it's there.
Yeah. So I like to remind people to think of acquiring real estate, not to compare it to a stock portfolio so much, because it doesn't behave like that really, but to compare it more like buying small businesses, right? If you wanted to buy like a Jimmy John's franchise and it was creating $50,000 a year, you could buy that with cash, or you could buy 2 Jimmy John's franchises and finance half of each and own 2. Now you do have a debt service payment, that's true. So you'd have $100,000 of income from those to help pay that debt. And after paying that debt, you might not have $50,000 left like you would have had if you bought the one fully in cash. But by paying that debt down, eventually you'll have both businesses paying you the income instead of just one. And so if you need the money now, then buying something with cash, if you need the income now, buying something with cash is the highest cash flow scenario that you'll get probably. There's a few exceptions to that, which is why I say probably, but 99% of the time, buying with cash gives you the best income position, but it gives you the lowest optimization of the other components, right? The equity appreciation. The house is going to appreciate at 3% regardless if that's what we're modeling, but your investment, when you're leveraging that 3% appreciation could mean twice as much appreciation if you have it on 2 properties instead of 1. So if you just think about it, if you need the cash flow now, buying cash is the ultimate cash flow position. But if you're wanting the cash flow for later, you're better off using leverage and getting more rent on more properties, even if you're not collecting those because you have to pay them out in the mortgages. Once those mortgages get paid down and the rents creep up over time, now you're collecting rent from 4 houses or 6 houses instead of just 1. And your ultimate cash flow when you need it will be significantly higher in the future.
Yeah, and if you look at what I'm looking at now, so like I said earlier, I've got a lot of millennial clients who are just starting to dip their toes in possibly buying their first or second property. But in my scenario, I already have a couple of rentals. I have one with high equity. I'm thinking about, I'm still working, but I'm closer to retirement. And in maybe 6 years, I'm going to want some of that money so I can either work part-time or, slowly get out of working full-time. And so what I'm doing, there's so many ways to look at it. Like I'm going to put 50% equity into 2 properties when I sell the one that I have. So that gives me more cash flow in case I want that income and want to back off working so many hours. So there's so much flexibility in it. But I think with a lot of the clients that I'm working with right now, they're at this point where they can sacrifice some of the income from cash flow and build money that they're going to be able to, retire young if they want and move on.
Yeah, here's a graph that shows the trajectory of what your cash flow will be by making that change, right? In the portfolio that we looked at first, this is it creeps up over time, but if you're looking for $120,000 of cash flow, which is what let's skip this real quick, which is what this line represents, you're going to get there 17 years earlier by owning more real estate where the cash flow that's going into your pocket is on a steeper curve than just leaving it alone and just maximizing for cash flow in the current moment. This helps you maximize cash flow later when you might need it, depending on what phase you're in.
Well, that's great. As always, it's been very enlightening. I love working with you and I love your brain and how it works and everything that you do for my clients. So
I really appreciate that, Marie.
Yeah, thanks so much for this little lesson.
You're welcome. And I love your energy and I love how you work with people. So thanks for that partnership.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.